I'm Melba Pound, and I was born in the county, Hillier to be exact. The place was a very small place, and so when it was time for me to go to school in Wellington, there wasn't transportation available. So I had to ride my bicycle for several miles, open up a big barn door and put my bike in there, and then retrieve the bicycle when the bus brought me back that far. This went on for some time, and then my grandfather and grandmother, who live in Brighton, decided that maybe I should come and live with them and go to high school in Brighton. So that's what I did. One story about our traveling to Brighton was about us stopping at the Wellers Bay Cheese Factory, and we'd go in, and the cheesemaker would get out a big several sheets of newspaper, and then he'd go over to the vat where the curd was and put curd in the newspaper and give it to us in the back seat, and we were quite happy in the rest of the way to Brighton. I loved coming to Brighton because my grandparents in Brighton had a telephone, and we didn't have a telephone. And so when I was very young, my grandmother would put me up on a chair, and I'd pick up the receiver, put it up to my ear, speak into the mouthpiece, and then dial with the ringer on the side. And the operator would say, "Number, please?" And I'd say, "1, please," and then give it to my grandmother, and she'd order her groceries. In about 2 hours, Mr. Greenfield, the grocer, would come putting along in his Model T Ford, bring in my grandmother's groceries that she'd ordered, and then he'd leave, and she'd go over every item, weigh the meat, and didn't hesitate to call him back if she didn't agree with what he'd given her. My grandfather worked for the Canadian Canners. He was a troubleshooter for all the Eastern Ontario factories. And they had factories in Hillier, Wellington, Bloomfield, Picton, Northport, Rednersville. And so that if there were any problems, he, in the middle of the night, might have to try and solve it. And I would hear him talking on the phone in the middle of the night, and I thought that he was so smart because he could solve these problems over the phone. Go to a certain place and get a truck and take that truck and go pick up a part someplace else. But as a small child, he sounded like a very important person to me. When we moved to Brighton, I soon made friends. And some of the things that we used to do, the whole group of us would walk up from the high school and walk up to the area in town where Mrs. B's candy place is. There was a drugstore, and it had a soda fountain in it and a nice cream parlor at the back. And we'd go in there and talk. And actually, it was in this soda fountain where I was introduced to this young fellow who had just come back from overseas in December of 1945. 5 years later, we were married, and we were married for 66 years. So Wilf also had a lot of stories, and together we had a lot of stories, and his parents came here in, I think, 1914, and they had a lot of stories too. So, and I was a good listener, so I got a lot of knowledge from them. One of the things that, as well as visiting the soda shop, we used to do was go to the movies if we had enough money, which would have been 10 cents. Some of us had it, some of us didn't. And we used to go to the movie theater, and it was where the building now called the Quick Brown Fox is on the south of Mrs. B's. And another thing that we used to like to do was go to Young People's, which was an organization within the church. And sometimes we put on plays up at the Old Town Hall or the Opera House. and we put on plays. Mrs. Dunnett was the director of the play this one year, and that's Rob Dunnett's mother. And she was doing the casting with the young people's group, and she said there's one character in there, and she's a red-headed floozy called Fritzy, and she has to do 5 different changes in her wardrobe because she's pretending she's 5 different people. And Mrs. Dunnett said, and we will get a red wig from Malibu in Toronto. I said, Mrs. Dunnett, I don't act like that. I wouldn't be able to take that part. And she said, Melba, let it be a challenge to you. And I've never forgotten that advice. I ended up playing the part of Fritzy. We got the red wig from Toronto, and put on pink lipstick, which didn't go. And the next night we had to go and buy like an orangey type lipstick that would go with my red wig. And in this one scene, Fritzy was in a slinky black dress, and she was trying to pretend she was somebody she wasn't, and she should have said tete-a-tete. And she said, teet-a-tete. I could hear my French teacher laugh over and above all the crowd that was there. I could hear my French teacher laughing. And I also, we had plays in that same town hall. We had plays that we'd put on from the high school. The one time that I did the Lady Macbeth sleepwalking scene on that stage too. We used to play badminton in that town hall. In any of the concerts that the high school put on, or any commencement exercises, which they call graduation now, but any commencement exercises, they held them in the town hall before it blew down. We know it as King Edward Park, but at one time it was called the Brighton Fairgrounds. And down there was a great big grandstand, and then across from it was a booth where the announcer stayed. And it was a beautiful track for those sulky races. They also, underneath the grandstand, they had spaces for sewing and all the competitions, like sewing and baking and all that sort of thing underneath the grandstand. And animals, they put the animals on display too. And they had show horses that they used to run in front of the grandstand. And the guy in the booth would stand with a megaphone and he'd say, "Horse number 34, will you please return to the grandstand?" Anyway, in 1954, that all blew down and was damaged, and trees blew down and everything in Hurricane Hazel. That just completely smashed the grandstand, and they never ever seemed to build it back up again. The other visitors we had at the fairgrounds were the gypsies, and they used to put up their tents on the roadway between ENSS and the Brighton Public School. And they camped out over there, and they had pots and pans for sale and sharpened knives and told fortunes. And so they would camp there, and that road was known as Gypsy Lane. And they'd camp there while the Brighton Fair was on. And then they'd move on to some other town. I think they were in Smithfield too. As an added note, when we were talking about the racetrack, I should tell you about a man called Harry Ingalls. And he's the one that invented that starting gate. It would be out like this. These 2 wings were fastened to a vehicle, and they would drive the vehicle with the horses in behind these. And then it would, as they got faster and faster and faster, and they'd close them and pull off to the side, and the horses would go on.